Mr. Hastings, thank you very much for doing this, and good to see you on TV Rain. First of all, I would like to ask you about your op-ed that was published in Bloomberg. First thing I'm interested in is Global South. It's becoming more important these days, and it's becoming a partner of Russia. Is that so?
I think we're seeing the world reshaping itself. In some ways, it's inevitable. In other ways, one has to regret it. In that the wisest historian I've ever known always said that the most important thing for world peace is order and stability. Well, over the last 20 years, we've lost a lot of order and stability. And what we're seeing is a reshaping. During the Cold War, we had two camps. We had East and we had West. We had Russia and China, and we had the United States and its allies. Today, there are a large number of countries around the world that do not wish to take sides as between the West and Russia and China. And I think this is going to prove to be a permanent development that a well-known Malaysian politician who was president of the UN Security Council said recently that a lot of people in the South especially do not wish to see Russia suffer absolute defeat because they believe that American arrogance would be unbearable if Russia did suffer absolute defeat. Now, that's a point of view that one may or may not share, but it's a point of view that is undoubtedly widely held, especially in the South.
Do you personally share this view? Do you think that the West is arrogant?
I think there's no doubt that one reason that so many countries are skeptical of the Western narrative of what is happening today with China and Russia is because a lot of people around the world do see the West as arrogant and do see the United States especially as arrogant. And I've written many times in my journalism and in my books that we might get along better in the world if we displayed a little bit more humility, that there are a lot of countries out there that don't see a big difference between the United States and Russia. For instance, a very senior military friend of mine has recently been in Africa, and he was telling me the other day that one African country he'd visited, he'd asked its president why he was not supporting the West over Ukraine, why he was not supporting sanctions. And the president replied, I don't see the difference between what Russia is doing in Ukraine and what the United States and its allies did in Iraq. And some of us do see that problem, that some of us who were very opposed to the American invasion of Iraq, we do see a problem there that I don't, now personally, I passionately believe in the case of Ukraine and Russia, that it's enormously important that Russia does not prevail, that Russia is not able to extinguish Ukraine. But on the other hand, I do understand why many people around the world are skeptical about simply believing everything the America and its allies tell them.
So it basically looks like the choice between Russia and the United States. But right now people are dying in Ukraine and Russia is obviously responsible. Isn't it, I mean, why the West is arrogant in this situation, in your opinion? And why West is responsible? What should be the different approach of the United States, of the European Union in this catastrophe?
Because I'm a historian as well as a journalist, that I tend not to see the world in black and white. Now, I passionately support Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. So it's not that my own support for Ukraine is in doubt. It's because I'm a historian, I do understand, first of all, while Russia does have this chronic sense of grievance towards the West, and I do think it's important to understand where that sense of grievance comes from, that I've never forgotten around 20 years ago, quite soon after 9/11, after the attack on the Twin Towers, I was working in Moscow researching a book on the Second World War, and my interpreter, who was firmly sympathetic to the West, so it wasn't that she was a government apparatchik, but she said, you know, a lot of my friends here, they think that the Americans got what was coming to them over 9/11. that they were delighted by 9/11. And I always think whenever I'm thinking about Russia and whenever I'm thinking about the West, I try to understand the other side's point of view. Now, none of that weakens my total support for Ukraine, but I try to understand where the other side's coming from.
The other side is constantly lying. If I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry about being so straight,
Yeah.
but I watch Russian state propaganda, and every single day they spread the false information about the situation in Ukraine and about their motives, actually, of invasion. So maybe there should be other attempts of explaining to this other countries which actually support Russia.
Oh, yes.
I mean, what should be the result? I mean, the way of resolving this issue.
We are very concerned about the success of Russian and, for that matter, Chinese propaganda in the South and in Africa especially. An awful lot of people, they watch Russia Today. They prefer to accept the Russian narrative of what's happening in Ukraine to the Western narrative. And this is a failure of Western propaganda, that we should be able to deploy truth in support of our cause. And we're not doing too well at deploying our own propaganda against the propaganda of Russia, and I say again, also of China. So we have to be realistic about this, and we have to do better. And we also have to do better in the area, for example, of sanctions. At the moment, sanctions are incredibly leaky, that Russia is able to get an enormous amount of imports into the country through third countries. I think that the economic aspect of the struggle with Russia is as important as the military struggle. And unless we can tighten sanctions, unless we can make them more effective, this war will go on.
One of the reasons I'm so interested in this conversation with you is that usually there are no, famous people and respected people in the West who support the idea that, it's not, that Russia actually has partners in different parts of the world. And you are an exception in this situation. So do you think that your point of view is supported in the establishment?
I'm coming from a special place because I'm a historian and I've studied a lot of Russian history and I've written a lot about Russia's part. And I passionately believe that the basis for all successful international relations must be respect. And I do believe it's terribly important to respect the Russian people, even if one has no respect at all for Vladimir Putin. So all the time in what I'm writing and what I'm saying on television and radio about the Ukraine struggle, I'm trying never to lose sight of the fact that we have to try and retain a dialogue with the people of Russia, even if it's impossible to have a dialogue with Vladimir Putin. So that the business of keeping talking is terribly important, I think. So what, as a historian, I tend to take a more nuanced view than some people do about relations between East and West.
But how can you talk to the person who is wanted by the International Criminal Court, who has committed crimes against humanity and crimes of aggression in Ukraine? How?
Yeah, but you have to remember, when I was a young man, I was a reporter in Vietnam.
Okay.
And I'm always saying to myself that I saw the Americans in Vietnam do things to innocent people as terrible as those which the Russians are doing today in Ukraine. Now, that does not for a moment make what the Russians are doing in Ukraine acceptable, but one is aware that all nations are capable of doing very bad things, and I think it's terribly important to bear that in mind. And I've never forgotten the sights I saw as a young man, as a reporter for BBC in Vietnam more than 50 years ago. But none of this means sympathy for the Russian cause in the smallest degree. It just means understanding of what the world is like.
How does this war end, and when it ends, Mr. Hastings, in your opinion?
it's impossible to say how or when it will end. The only thing that's for certain, at some point, there will have to be a parley, a dialogue, in which the United States will have to be involved, because the one certainty is that at the end of all this, Ukraine must have a guarantee of its own security. And the United States is the only nation that is capable of providing a guarantee of the kind that will stick. So when people say, oh, there must only be a dialogue between Ukraine and Russia about this, I don't buy this at all. I believe that America has got to be there as the guarantor of Ukraine. And I do not believe that Ukraine can or should trust the Western Europeans as guarantors, because the Western Europeans have proved that they talk a good game, but they deliver much less.
So it means that there is no way out. I mean,
there is no way out until one side or the other, we've got to hope that it is Russia, realizes that it cannot prevail on the battlefield. And at the moment, today, Vladimir Putin believes, especially with the possibility of a change of president in the United States after next year, Vladimir Putin believes that time may be on his side. And he is going to go on hoping. So I do not believe this war will end soon. And I believe it's essential, not only for Ukraine and the people of Ukraine, but also for stability and order in the world, that the West sustains its will to support Ukraine through this struggle.
Thank you so much. It was really
interesting. Thank you very much. My pleasure.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times.
We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day.
There's no other independent news channel in Russian. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia in English as well.
So that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube, and let's take a look at our future together.